At the beginning of the 20th century, Petersburg shuddered with horror. A maniac appeared in the city, who, with incredible cruelty, killed women of easy virtue. He introduced himself to his victims as Vadim Krovyanik. He became one of the first serial killers in the history of Russian detective work. The date and place of Radkovich's birth are not given in the sources. According to his own confessions, he was a cadet of the Arakchevsky Cadet Corps in Nizhny Novgorod. 28-year-old Nikolai Radkovich, who served as a sailor on the steamer Mstislav Udaloy, was born into a noble family. But there is no exact and reliable information about his family in historical sources. It all started when the maniac was still a teenager. At that time he studied at the Novgorod Cadet Corps. Once the young man was lured into her house, and then seduced by the 30-year-old widow of an officer. The inexperienced partner quickly got bored with the woman, and she broke up with him. The rejected lover was crushed. His indignation grew into rage when he learned that the passionate widow had awarded him syphilis. The young man went to his temptress. And she was just having fun with one of the teachers of the cadet corps. The ardent teenager rushed at the woman with a knife, but was immediately neutralized by his rival. After this incident, the young man was expelled from the school and he leaves for St. Petersburg. The first victim of the Russian Jack the Ripper was Anna Blumentrost. Her corpse was discovered on July 1, 1909 in the Neva. There were 12 stab wounds on her body. Witnesses claimed that shortly before the murder they saw Anna in the company of a young man with disproportionately long arms. The stranger wore a wide-brimmed hat and overcoat. Already in the morgue, the police doctor determined that the cause of death was deep stab wounds. A total of 12 cuts were counted, on the face, neck and shoulders, chest and genitals. It is worth saying that the police literally immediately began to receive reports about the unrest of St. Petersburg prostitutes. In general, it was the prostitutes who first sensed that a dangerous killer had appeared in the city. The next attack took place 2 weeks later, July 14 at 2 o'clock in the morning to the Hotel Danube. The killer inflicted about 20 wounds on the victim. At 8 in the morning the bellhop is cleaning. At this moment, a man comes out of the 9th room. The bellboy hears him talking through the door with his companion. The man gives a generous tip to the bellhop and asks him not to wake his companion yet, they say, let him rest after a hard night. At 10 in the morning, the bellboy knocks on the door of room 9 and tries to wake his guest. When the bellhop looks into the room through the keyhole, he sees the bloodied corpse of a girl lying on the bed. In St. Petersburg, panic broke out among the prostitutes, and the police began to look for the cruel killer with particular zeal. While the police were interrogating possible witnesses and carrying out search activities, the killer made a new attack. On July 24, 1909, the maid Zinaida Lavina was returning home from the Maltsevsky market. Suddenly, an unknown man in a wide-brimmed hat ran out of the gateway. With a cry, "Death to the beauties!" the unknown person stabs Zinaida Lavina in the shoulder, then inflicts several blows in the stomach. Passers-by raised a cry, and the unknown man immediately ran away. Fortunately, all the wounds were not serious and did not threaten the woman's life. Also, the killer made a serious mistake. He lost his knife at the crime scene. The investigation of these crimes was entrusted to the head of the St. Petersburg police, Vladimir Filipov. An experienced detective immediately realized that all 3 murders were committed by the same person. Wards Filipov went around all the hot spots in the areas where the attacks were committed. And regular customers of one of the taverns said that they often saw a young man there who assured random drinking companions that he hated women, and also reveled in conversations about the murders of prostitutes. The suspect posed as a sailor and lived in a nearby bunkhouse. Based on the information received, Vladimir Filipov concluded that the criminal must be sought among the sailors. The detective began to study and compare among themselves the lists of the crews of the ships that called at the port of St. Petersburg, and the names of the guests of the aforementioned rooming house. The surname Radkovich was found by him in both lists. However, it was not possible to immediately detain Radkovich. It turned out that he had already moved out of the rooming house and now lives in a rented apartment. But even there, the police did not catch the criminal. He seemed to sense danger and disappeared. On the wall of the room, the police found the maniac's handwritten motto, "Death to the Beauties." Meanwhile, the attacks on the girls continued. Another crime occurred on September 17 on Semyonovskaya Street. A girl named Maria Budachnikova was brutally murdered. 35 stab wounds were counted on her body, on the chest, abdomen and genitals. The killer also strangled his victim. At the head of the bed was a piece of paper with the text, "The money was taken for the labor of sending to the next world and because the dead do not need it." The killer of this woman in Jairus in the hotel. At about 7 in the morning, a man came out of the room and tried to get past the sleeping bellhop. When the bellboy called him, he said that the girl was still sleeping and asked to wake her up later. The bellboy had heard a lot about the murder at the Danube Hotel, so without delay he went up to the 8th room and looked through the keyhole. He saw Budachnikova lying on the bed in an unnatural position. The bellboy tries to detain an unknown man and a fight breaks out between them. Other employees of the hotel ran to the noise, and an unknown man was detained. It turned out to be Nikolai Radkovich. Among other things, the killer robbed his victim. In this case, too, there is nothing extraordinary. As they gain experience, serial killers allow themselves to take the money and valuables of their victims. So to say, combine business with pleasure. Therefore, one should not be surprised that the killer took the money of his victim, despite the fact that the crime itself had a clear sexual nature. Much more worth paying attention to, but what did the killer do with his victim all night? The answer is not as clear-cut as it might seem at first glance. Although no, it's not. The killer did not immediately kill his victims. At first he played with them. Namely, he strangled his victims many times. The author dares to suggest that such torture, when the victim is strangled and then brought back to life, lasted quite a long time, an hour, maybe 2. Ultimately, the killer killed his victim with a knife, inflicting a huge number of blows, thereby showing his rage. We know that none of the victims were raped. This is another plus in the theory of Radkovich's necrophilia. It can be assumed that he was in his fantasies and masturbated at the same time. He did not try to hide the body. It was important for him to see the torn victim. Thus he represented himself as a kind of Lord of Life. Nikolai Radkovich was placed in the psychiatric hospital of St. Nicholas the Wonderworker, on the banks of the Pryaska River. The opinions of psychiatrists were divided. Some believed that Radkovich was fully responsible for his actions, and therefore could be brought to trial. Others believed that he was not capable of answering for his crimes. On March 10, 1912, a jury trial took place, which sentenced Nikolai Radkovich to 8 years of hard labor. Radkovich was not destined to be released. In the autumn of 1916, he was killed by other convicts. On the one hand, a cold-blooded and ruthless thug who perfectly understands the gravity of his deeds. On the other hand, an ugly and mentally deprived psychopath who considers it his duty to cleanse the earth of depraved women. This is where the story of one of the first Russian serial killers ends. This is where our video ends. Friends, I will be very grateful if you just like, write a comment and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for being with us.